If you think about what fraud is the creation of trust, and then it's betrayal. And that means there's no acid more effective at destroying trust than fraud.
Many of our fellow citizens apparently believe that your services were bought by Charles Keating, that you were bribed, that you sold your office, that you traded your honor and your good names for contributions and other benefits. Many of these same people also apparently believe that your action, and perhaps the actions of other senators and congressmen, were solely responsible for the saving and loan failures of scandalous proportions.
Keating was a not very effective real estate developer who was brought in to acquire Lincoln Savings and Loan by Michael Milken. Charles Keating was and is a very nasty, fraudulent guy. His reputation was, quote, for buying and selling politicians, unquote. One of the people on this list was then Representative McCain.
Of the 5 senators here before you, Senator McCain had the closest personal friendship with Charles Keating.
They were confidants, they were mutual political supporters. Of course, the money flowed one direction from Charles Keating to then Representative and eventually Senator McCain. He was someone that McCain took much of his policy advice from on how you should regulate, or in this case, not regulate, savings and loans.
Senator McCain also was the only one who received personal as well as political benefits from Charles Keating.
The unique aspect of this relationship between Senator McCain and Charles Keating extended to the family. They're personal friends. Keating flies him down multiple times to the Bahamas at Keating's expense. Keating doesn't simply fly Senator McCain, he flies Senator McCain's wife as well, and the kids, and this one I really like, the babysitter. Regulators had discovered that Keating had engaged in a massive violation of a key rule called the direct investment rule. And this rule restricted how much savings and loans could own in the way of real estate as opposed to making loans on it. The key to this rule was that direct investments were an ideal way to engage in accounting fraud. And accounting fraud is the weapon of choice of these kinds of corporate frauds.
Several senators met with regulators about a pending enforcement matter involving a single company which had sued the bank board in the federal courts.
Keating has set up the meeting by recruiting 5 U.S. senators, and of course all 5 of the senators received major political contributions from Charles Keating. The purpose of the meeting, from Keating's standpoint, is very clear because he puts it in writing. He wants us not to take any enforcement action against this violation of the direct investment rule. Effectively, he wants to immunize the worst violation in our history in an institution he's looting.
2, the senators did not have aides present, and more importantly, the chief regulator, Chairman Gray, was specifically directed not to bring aides with him.
This meeting was set up for deniability, and the idea was to have 5 U.S. senators there and only 1 regulator there. So there'd be the word of 5 U.S. senators against the 1 regulator with no aides to back him up.
3, Mr. Keating, on whose behalf the meeting was held, was a major political contributor to each of the senators who attended the meeting.
And that leads to the meeting precisely 1 week later with 4 of us from the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco and all 5 U.S. senators. It was perceived as enormous pressure and designed to intimidate because that's exactly how Charles Keating set it up.
4, the regulators were asked to withdraw a duly promulgated regulation at the request of a single company and were told that the company would do certain things in return.
We are analogous to the police. Can you imagine someone coming to the police and saying, well, you caught these guys red-handed, and they've committed this enormous crime, the biggest in your history, and you know that this kind of crime always leads to terrible, terrible harm to the public, but we don't want you to do anything because he's a big political contributor to us, so you shouldn't take any action. So we didn't think that they would have the nerve to try to do it again when there were actually witnesses. And in particular, we didn't think they would have the nerve because one of my jobs at the meeting was to take notes. And they do this same thing at the start of the meeting. Senator DeConcini says, we want you not to take enforcement action against the institution. And Senator DeConcini does it speaking on behalf of the group that he's hosting. And Senator McCain says nothing to distinguish himself or to say, no, that's not proper. Bank Board stops all action to even find the facts against Lincoln Savings, even though it knows it's a criminal enterprise. Keating is allowed to stay open for an additional 2 years, which allows them to cause these massive losses of $3.4 billion. It produced the most expensive failure in U.S. history of a depository institution. Senator McCain knew the facts because we had briefed him. He knew this was a criminal enterprise. He knew that what was being done was improper. He knew how much undue political pressure, his words, or at least his words originally, was being brought to bear. He was uniquely in the position where he could have protested this and stopped it, stopped this loss, but he did nothing. We all ended up paying that $3.4 billion. He just never got it. Now, the savings and loan debacle taught a whole lot of people that was an error, but it didn't teach that to Senator McCain. Instead, he instinctively goes towards greater deregulation.
While I was traveling overseas, our financial markets experienced unfortunately, another round of upheaval.
His reaction to the subprime crisis that we're going through now, which is unquestionably a product of deregulation, was to recommend in his first speech that we should have further deregulation.
Our financial market approach should include encouraging increased capital in financial institutions by removing regulatory, accounting, and tax impediments to raising capital.
He's said that he doesn't know much about economics. His key advisor on economics is Phil Gramm. Phil Gramm is more responsible than anyone in Washington in terms of pushing deregulation and non-regulation and to make fun of the victims.
You've heard of mental depression. This is a mental recession. You just hear this constant whining, complaining. We've sort of become a nation of whiners.
He's picked the worst possible source of advice. Well, if you can't even get the Charles Keatings of the world right, you just don't have that judgment factor in terms of your key advisors. Senator McCain has not learned the lessons and has continued to follow policies that are going to produce a disaster.